All right. I hope you can all see my screen at this point. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay. Yalla. All right. So today we are going to look at SQLi, which we did last week. We're going to do an extra add-on. And then we are also going to look at some key terms that we should know regarding there are terms like input validation and on and on. And then we are also going to look at file inclusion, which would be an interesting concept to look at. Then we move to LFI, which is local file inclusion. We'll do a demo on that. Then we'll also do another demo on remote file inclusion. So all of this will make sense at the end of the class. Then finally, we'll look at some upcoming assignments for the week. Then we have a 10-minute tactical, which would be fun. We'll be going back to our DVWA to do a few things. All right. Now, when I think you are all aware of how a query looks like, we dealt with this last week where we said select this star here means everything. We could select a customer ID, a first in every column. You could select that and then you would get your response where the customer ID is equal to 1, and that will give us the first entry. Sorry, select from others where the customer ID is equal to 1. Now there is, I think we talked about relational databases where we said the information from the databases are linked. So you'd see that this customer ID is the same customer ID we have here. So when I say select from others where customer ID is equal to 1, it would give us this and then the second one, right? So as you can see, this is the response that would be returned if I use this SQL query, right? This is not SQL injection. This is just a query, right? It becomes an injection when you use it on an application to retrieve information, right? At this point, this is a query that a programmer would use in the application. And then we also have select from others where customer ID is equal to 1 or 1:1. This looks like the point where we want to do an SQL injection. This is where we want to trick a system. We'll take a look at a demo of that shortly. So this will give us back the whole others table based on the true logic, right? So at this point, we are selecting from others where customer ID is equal to 1 or 1 is equal to 1. Now this would be equal to true, right? So it would be, so then that means select from others, all of this part would be equal to true. So the system will just give us what we need. And that is just the first part, because the second part would sort of be invalid and the system will just consider the first part of the query, right? So we are going to jump into some SQL. I'm going to turn on my my server. So I'm going to turn on my MAMP server, which is where my SQL injection exists. It's okay. My SQL server is on. So we have two tables. We have, wait, what? I'm supposed to have a table here. That is interesting. Nope, this is not the server I need. I need to turn on a different server. Let me turn that on. Let me post it. Yep, that is the server. All right, so we have this table, Lord for Quad, e-commerce. And we have three tables right here. We have the carts, we have the items, and then the user. So this is the user's table. It has a username, and then it has a password. And then if the user is logged in, that 0 will become 1. It's 0 or 1, which is true or false. 1 for true, 0 for false. And these are their IDs. We have the items table, which is the items in the store, which at this point, this is an e-commerce site. So we have a 3D printer, all of that, and then how many items, the quantity in our reserves. Then we have the carts, right? This belongs to a particular user. Now you see lots of 1s and 2s and 3s. This is how a relational database looks like. And in a way, we could call this a normalized database. Oh, 9 days left. Yeah, that was the anyway, so this is what a relational database looks like, or we call it normalization, which we can go deep into that. So at this point, instead of putting in the name of the item, I'm actually using the item's ID instead. So cat ID does not matter, but then we have item ID 1, user number 2. So that if I click on this, it will take me to that particular item in the database, right? Showing that whatever item I have there, it's linked directly to item number 1. And then if I click on user number 2, it will take me to what it is referencing, which is Lisa, right? So also, instead of these numbers, I could have actually replaced this with the item names, and that would have been okay. But this is there's a proper way of coding. All right. So now, if I want to make a query, right, I want to ask certain questions, right, from the cat table, obviously. So I go into SQL, and then my question would be, if I say select from cat, select everything from cats, it's going to give me the full table, right? But if I do select from cats, where maybe customer ID, how did I spell the IDs? Let's check from here. User ID instead. So select from cards where user ID is equal to, let's say, 2, right? And I click on go. I have all the items that belongs to user number 2. Now, at this point, there's a thing that there is a concept in SQL called ordering, right? So we could order this result by rows, the column name. So I could go back to my query and say that I want to order this by maybe the item ID or maybe user ID, whatever I want to do, because this was provided. So let's go back to the query, show query box. And then I'll say something like this, order by, and then I'll put in the name of the column, which was user ID. And when I do this, it would sort them out by the user ID, right? Where is the go function? So that is it. But unfortunately, they are all the same. So it's best to use item ID, which will show the difference properly. So item ID. Now I'll use this to explain a concept shortly. So you can see, can you see the arrow here, which is for sorting? It's facing up, meaning ascending order. Assuming we want this to be in descending order, we could also change, we could just say we want this to be in descending order. And this is all SQL. This is all my SQL lingo. So as you can see, in descending order, the order has changed because we are ordering by this column. Now, the concept of ordering by columns, instead of putting in the name of the column, you could just use a number. So if I do order by 2, that means I'm talking about column number 2. I don't know if SQL counts from 0 or from 1. So let's see what will happen based on our result. Go. Okay, so that means SQL starts to count from 1. So this is column number 0. You know, in programming languages, most of the time they count from 0. In as much as this is not a programming language, they still count from 0. So we have, so this is column number 0, column number 1, column number 2. So if I want to sort by this, I need to change that up. Need to take, so order by 1. Let's see how that works. Descending order, let's change that to ascending order to see if it's going to work. So I'm good. So when I did this, ordering by ascending order, the order has changed. And now, so that proves the concept that in SQL, in my SQL queries, you can use order by to sort of check the number of columns available. We need this for our injection. Now let's move to a different angle. What if we change this to maybe 4, right? I told you there are 3 columns here. So 0, 1, 2. If I do, let's say 4, it's going to give an error, and the error is that unknown column 4. That means the columns in the database do not get to 4. If I do 3, let's see if 3 will work. 3 worked for some reason where it used this guy here. So probably it's using 1, 2, 3 or 0, 1, 2, one of them, but that's an easy way to count the columns in a table. All right. Now to do a union select, we don't need this order by, we need it later. That is where I do something like this, union, and then I say select. Maybe I know that there's a table named username and password. I know there's a table named users or maybe customers or whatever. So I need to guess these names, which we'll get from the errors. So username, password, admin, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is how we can do a union select. Union select, and then you probably put in username or password. And then we do from, we need a table name. So from users, right? What I'm doing is I'm trying to merge two. So a union is used to merge 2 queries together, right? So I'm getting information from one table, but then I could also join that information to, or try to use that query to retrieve another information from a different table. So when I do this, it's going to execute this query, and then it would also try to execute the next one, which is union select blah, blah, blah. So if I click on go, there should be an error that would pop up, right? Because this was correct, but then the error is that the use select statements have different number of columns. So even if you are doing a union, you should make sure both tables, which is cat, and the next one or the columns you are asking for should have the same number of columns. And that is where we use, you could do now, which is to specify that, why is this, oh my God. Okay, let's just put that there. So same query, right? So union select, because they need 3, this guy is going to bring out 3. I also need to make sure this one brings 3. So if I click on go, unknown column name, let's username. Oh, again. Okay, password from users table. So once I clicked on go, you will notice that the information I asked for, which is select from cat where user ID is equal to 2, was returned. And then union, meaning I'm joining this to another information. I'm trying to use this to ask for another information from a different table. So that is where we can use select, and then you can see that the username and the password is provided at the bottom. Now that opens up a lot of possibilities, but you always, sometimes I think in one of your, assignments, you would have to do something similar to use a union select. And this is a tip. You would notice that the more you keep doing it, it's still not working, and you get the error that pops up that says the column counts are not the same. So all you have to do is to keep adding now, and you could just keep doing this now, right? Until, so you keep doing this, run the query, do it, run the query until the query works, right? But then regardless, this is in a case, how many are these? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is in a case where you are assuming that the cat table also has 5 columns, right? So you will keep doing this until it works, and you could go on and on and on and on. Now, the order of the columns do not matter. Okay, I could put this here. Put user, oh, not again. So username, all of these do not matter. So I've changed the, so with this type of, this is how you could do an SQL. You could use this for an SQL injection, but then you don't need to know the order of the columns. All you need to know is the name of the column so that you could retrieve it, and also the number of columns available, but you don't need to know the order. So if I run the same query, you would know that it's returned, but then the order has changed. Passwords on the left, and then usernames on the right. Okay. Now back to our slide. Recording in progress, nice. Now, terms you might hear today, we have PHP, which is a hypertext preprocessor. It should have been HPP, in my opinion, but here we are with PHP. So it's an open source language. It's a free server-side scripting language widely used in web development. It's so popular that a lot of programming languages have tried to overcome it, but they can't. It will take a long time. So the thing is HTML, CSS, JavaScript. It's mostly on the front end, which is the interface side, manipulating what you see, right? But then if you want to keep information, persistent data, if you want to keep people's records and all of that permanently, you would need a database, you would need a server, and PHP was one of the languages that can communicate with servers easily. So, and it was introduced a long time ago. So it became popular until recently, lots of, I think Python came in trying to shake them, but PHP still stands strong. And then there's also, I think there are lots of JavaScript frameworks that also provide that server-side scripting. So that is the job of PHP. I think when I used to be a developer before I retired, I was very good at PHP. That was the only language I loved. And I never moved to other languages, but I felt like, I don't know, whenever I program, it feels like I'm singing. It feels so easy to program in PHP for me. It's just that you need to do a lot of security work because you need to do everything on your own. But besides that, that is where PHP comes in. So today we are going to encounter a server that uses PHP, and we might have to do a few other things. That is why we are doing PHP here. And then we have command injection. It's a cyber attack that involves executing arbitrary commands on a host operating system. So at this point, you don't own the operating system. These servers we are talking about, these servers, right? A server, for example, the PHP admin or the SQL database I just showed is a server. And that server, so that server is actually, it could be a physical server or a software server. The one I ran was a software server on my system. Now, for that server to run, there has to be an existing operating system available. So the SQL server I showed is running on my Mac operating system. And then, so then when we do command injection, what we do is we can put in certain commands on certain websites. And in a way, we are able to trick that server into giving us access to the operating system's functionalities. So that is where command injection comes in. You could execute arbitrary commands anywhere on the system. You would see that we can go on a site and then get a reverse shell from just a regular website. Then there is input sanitization. Input sanitization is a process of checking, cleaning, and filtering data fields. I mentioned that I think when we did SQL injection, we said if you go to a website and then there is a form, username, and then password. The thing is that you can never trust humans. I think one time I was a TA, and then I decided to build a PHP application so that students could register for tutorial sessions, right? And it was just easy. Put in your student ID, right? And then I think that's that. It was just that. There was no second input field, just that. Put in your student ID, and then maybe choose the tutorial number, right? So tutorial number. That was all they had to do. Now I go into the system to check. One student came in, and then this is what he puts in. Student ID is supposed to be just numbers, right? He came in and then he put in SSSSSSSSS, lots of S's into the input field. And I came back and I was like, what? How is that possible? That was because I did not validate the input. I trusted the user to give me the data I want. So then these students came in, they don't care about my feelings. They just decided to do what they wanted. And in the end, it was, I mean, from that point, I had to now go back into the system to do some input validation. So input validation or sanitization is where you sort of check the information the user has entered onto your website. You don't trust the user, get that information, sanitize it. It's just like washing something with soap. Make sure it's clean. So you are going to take that text that the user has provided and then run it through a set of functions where you are running it through, probably checking if that if it contains, I'm asking for just numbers. And then if you provide anything beside numbers, the system should reject you. If you provide alphabets, the system should reject you. If you provide symbols, the system should reject you. That is where input sanitization comes in. Because if you don't do it, it's the same way, because if we do SQL injection, right? Here is the case, we are putting things like single quotes, we are putting things like star, right? All these are symbols that as a developer, you should not allow into your system, because these things can be used to create an SQL injection. So it's very important to always sanitize input and make sure, otherwise you always get harmful codes on your system. And then directory traversal is an HTTP attack that allows attackers to access restricted directories and execute commands outside of the web server's root directory. So there are certain files on Kali you should not be able to access, because maybe if you are using the Kali user, you are not the root user, so you should be restricted. But on certain websites, directory traversal is where you can just, in as much as you should be limited to the folder or the directory where the website or the website's files are, you are able to move up to other folders and explore. And that is a vulnerability that exists on some WordPress websites. And that's the thing, no matter, I think one time I posted a website, I think it was a WordPress website, and you have to manually disable these using, I think one of the WordPress files. You can disable it, put it probably mod rewrite or something like that. But then if you don't do it, anyone can just put in a particular directory on your site and they can just go there without any authentication. So it's always important. And then we are going to look at directory traversal properly in the next slide. Now this looks very similar to the Linux file system, right? So we have, this is probably the root directory, right? Like this is like the roots in terms of the disk or the file structure. And then we have a folder named bin, etc home, user. When we are looking for files of applications, this is where we go to. Mostly for mmap, we go to user, we go to share, and then we look for nmap, right? So that means nmap will be in this folder. Now, assuming there is a file named user in user bin, and then maybe the directory name is Derek, that would be located here. So that would be located here. And then that would be Derek, right? Because that is a directory. Right. So in this way, all these are directories, and the more you move, the more you go deeper, right? So you could go in here. So on your Kali, you have your Kali user is located in home, and then the name will be Kali, and then you have these files available on your server. Now, probably we have a website located here in the Derek folder, maybe a website for maybe guitar players, right? So this site contains a nice website, right? So when a user visits my website, I should restrict them so that they would not be able to leave this directory to other directories. They should be here. Even if there was another directory here, they shouldn't have access to it. They should always have access to just this website directory. Now, directory traversal is if you don't secure those directories, if you don't set those restrictions on your server, what happens is a person could literally just decide to move up, keep moving till they find information. So in Kali, right, there is a command to move back, and that command is cd. I think we all know that. If you want to change directory to go up, cd ... meaning you want to go up one directory. So if I'm here and I do cd ... that means I've been moved to the Derek directory. If I do another, so then we are going to do a quick, you guys are going to tell me which direction I'm moving to, all right? So when I do another cd ... you tell me in the chat which directory I'm moving to, okay? Just a sec. Close that, move that here. All right, so be ready. This shouldn't take us like 15 seconds to do. So annotator. All right, so currently we are in the website directory, right? Website directory. And then if I do cd .. what directory have I moved into? Derek, thank you. Now, if I do another ... where am I currently? Been good. If I do another one, where am I? It's about to get interesting. Let's carry on, people. I need more information. User, good. Now, if I do another ... where am I? Thank you. Now I'm going to do something. So now if I do this, right? As the name suggests, that means that I've been able to move backwards to the extent that I'm here. So now I can now decide to go down again. And now I can go into the home directory. So then if I decide to go into the music directory here, all I have to do is to specify the path. So I'm in home. I just have to do another slash to user one, another slash to music directory, because that is where my music files are. So then I will have to do user one slash music, right? Maybe that is where the passwords are hidden. So once I do this, I was here, but then because the administrator does not have enough directory restrictions, I'm able to just traverse my way or just find my way out of where I am, come here, and then go into any folder. In Kali, the password files will be located in etc. I think, yeah, etc shadow, etc password. So thank you to Ivan and Daniel and any other person that I've not seen on the chat for helping with this. So this is how directory traversals work, and it would surprise you how most websites are vulnerable to this. It looks like certain websites are not, but you would see other sites and you'll be so disappointed that they are vulnerable to a directory traversal attack. All right, now file inclusion is... So file inclusion is, just a sec, people. All right, so Josh, can't you achieve that result with just the cd ... command instead of using the slash? So if you do a ... command, it would surely work. It would work, but then you need to, it's like, you can't, for example, if you want to move into, let me put this here, right? So cd ... will surely take you back one directory, right? But then if you do another ... you will get an error. So that is why the slash is very important, because the slash, if you do a ... slash, that means that I'm moving back one directory. If you do just a single ... it would be accepted. The Kali system would accept it. But once you want to go into other directories, it would not be difficult, because you can't just do the cd ... home. Yeah, that would give you an error. Kali would be like, are you stuttering? What's going on? But yeah, I hope that was okay, Josh. All right. So
It was, thank you.
you're welcome. All right. At this point, if anyone has a question, I know we've gone through a lot. We've tackled SQL injection union attacks. We've also looked at PHP and a few other terms. And then we've looked at directory traversal. So we are about to take a look at file inclusions. So does anyone have a question regarding what we've talked about so far? What is the main difference between directory traversal and file inclusion attacks? So that is a good question, Erin. So file inclusion attacks is where you are just picking up a file, whether it's located on the server or not. So for example, if the website has, like maybe d.com, and then it does something like page, or maybe p or id is equal to 55 or 34, right? At the point where I'm replacing this with a file that might exist on the server, that means I'm trying to do a file inclusion, whether LFI or RFI, whether it's on the server or out of the server. But then you would need directory traversal, especially when you want to do a file inclusion attack. So just like Matthew has explained in the chat, going somewhere, directory traversal is where you are going somewhere on the server that you are not supposed to. And then file inclusion is going somewhere on the server that you are not supposed to and launching the file. Yep, absolutely. So to add up to what Matthew just said, you would need directory traversal, especially when you are dealing with LFI, because yeah, you surely need it, especially with LFI, because you want to access a file you don't have like that exists on the server. So you would need to use those // stuff. We'll see that shortly in action, so just be ready. All right, so moving back to this slide, I hope that answered your question. I think you have like about 5 people answering your question, Erin. I hope that was helpful. Any other question before we move on? Okay. So a file inclusion vulnerability allows an attacker to access unauthorized or sensitive files available on the web server or to execute malicious files on the web server by making the use of the include functionality, which we'll take a look at. Just the little explanation I give, where the site already has this parameter, page is equal to or file is equal to, trying to include a file that already exists legitimately. That is how certain pages work. When I started programming, I used to use these, especially with my GET request, until I found out, yeah, it was a terrible decision. That was when I learned how to use sessions and all of that. But on the other hand, most of the time you see something like this in the URL, page is equal to, then you'd see the page that they are trying to get access to. So if an attacker is able to, I think we'll see that in the next slide. So it could either be page, file, ID, anything else, and then it's going to work. And then we also have the now bytes. Sorry, then techniques for file inclusion include PHP wrappers, which is a functionality in PHP. Now bytes is, so for now bytes, I think you'll need it in one of your labs, but I'm still going to show it here. But this is how it works. So maybe there is the server or the administrator will decide that we don't allow these things on the server. Let's say they would ask you to provide a parameter, or let's do this, d.com question mark page is equal to, let's say, music page, right? Probably it's a page that contains music. Then this is what you do, but then in the programming section or within the codes, the developer has put in some extra defense mechanism to say that whatever has been provided, attach, right? Let's do like some basic programming here, attach PHP to it. So what you see here is that music plus PHP would now become this, would become music.php. And that will be the file. This is the PHP extension. So in this way, the developer would allow you to just do this, but then they have a way of attaching these extensions on the other end. Now, using the null byte approach, what you do is maybe you want to include a file like the etc password or the password file in Kali, but you don't want to be caught, right? Because even if you do, let's say something like this, / maybe you've gone back to etc passwd, right? Which is also a string or a word. This is what happens. If you do this, and then it's executed, once you put in the inputs, the application will change this input to / etc password .php, right? And this would provide an error because whatever application you want to deal with or whatever code you want to deal with, or whatever file you are trying to access using LFI or whatever, does not have PHP in the end. So therefore, it is not going to work. So null byte is where you provide a particular parameter or extra information that will trick the system. You remember when we were doing SQL injections, we said that if you do this, it means what? If you do double dash, what does it mean? It means you are commenting out or nullifying anything that comes after that double dash. The same way that double dash works the same way as a hash, which also means you are nullifying whatever comes after that. So with null bytes, you are going to put something like this here, which is %00. And what this means is that this is what you have to use, and anything that comes after this should be ignored in terms of the code. So now when this is processed, the PHP will not be shown anymore because this part of the code would not be executed. I hope that makes sense. So that is where now bytes comes in. So with this, you are able to access files, even if the programmer tried to put in some security like this and all of that stuff. You will surely need it in one of your assignments. I know I keep giving hints, but I'm just too generous.
Okay,
Right.
so are you 1 or plus?
Is there a question?
What do you have to get to? What?
All right, looks like that was just, yeah. All right, so then we have path truncation, and path truncation is where, so PHP has this mechanism where it does not, for example, if you include a long path for a file you are trying to access that you don't have access to, for example, this, right? Maybe you include a file that is so long, at a point PHP will just make it very short. That is what we call truncating it. It's going to truncate it. And once it truncates the file, you would be able to access. It's quite a sophisticated way of getting access to files. However, this used to work in, I think, 2008. That's PHP 5.3 thereabouts. So most of the new versions, it's not going to work. But then double encoding is where maybe you want to do this, but you know that the system, for example, the now bytes example, you know that the system is going to find out that this is a null byte and it's going to eliminate it. So what you could do is you could do double encoding, which is to convert this into maybe base 64, right? But then you do it twice so that even if the system has a decoder, it would not be able to decode it the second time. So that is where double encoding comes in, and it helps with the file inclusion attack. All right. All right. Now, we have a question, right? So what tools have we used so far that can find file inclusion vulnerabilities? I think we've used WP Scan, Hydra, and then Nikto. So out of these, which one of them can help you find a file inclusion vulnerability? WP Scan, Nikto, and that's absolutely correct. So Hydra, Nmap, maybe Nmap, if you find a script, because sometimes you could add your own scripts to Nmap. So if you find a script that could help you with that, then it would be perfect. But your answers are correct. WP Scan and then Nikto, please to help with that. Yeah, Jonathan, if you have a question, you can ask.
Yeah, so I was wondering if say you have the query, the question mark, and then page equals, right? If you were to add like a URL after that, would that just be a remote file inclusion, or is that even possible?
Yes, that would be a remote file inclusion because you are trying to access a file that is not on the current server.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So at this point, we'll go on a 2 minutes break. Before we look at LFI, RFI in detail, we'll go on a 2 minutes break, and then we would continue. Okay, so local file inclusion is the process of accessing files that are already locally present on the server through exploitation of vulnerable inclusion procedures implemented in the application. So I explained this a while ago where I said we are trying to access information on the server. However, this is only possible if the security or that type of restriction was not properly done by the administrator or whoever programmed the site or whoever set it up. One of them made that mistake. So as you can see, as an attacker, all I'm doing is I am just trying to request something that exists in the house. I'm not going for an outside information, just whatever exists in this particular house. I'm in the house, so I'm just trying to retrieve something from a different room in the same house. So with local file inclusion, as the name suggests, the files should be on your local server, and trying to access that, that is where local file inclusion comes in, right? So local file inclusion attacks account for 21% of all web attacks, and it allows unauthorized users to access files. It occurs when user input is supplied without proper validations, and 80% of websites uses PHP. This is why I smile. Now, this is an example of the local file inclusion. Page is equal to, and then we do something like this to have access to whatever file that is on the server. Now, this is bad. Why is this bad? It's because a threat actor, which is the attacker, can potentially get their hands on configuration files, and they can also upload a malicious file and then execute it via the URL path. And then also, it is bad because you are giving the threat actor keys to the kingdom and not knowing it. Because at this point, this file here already exists on the system, and we'll see it when I turn on my Kali. It's already on the system, right? So what if whatever file we want is not on the system, but then the website has a section where we could upload certain files. So if there's a way we could upload certain files, that makes it even easy. We just upload the file and then we just try to access it directly because it's already here. Then we try to access it directly. So this graphic sort of explains the process I have talked about in the last 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to show you how LFI works. And then our 10-minute tactical today would be along those lines where you are going to do your own LFI. And I'll be happy to see you guys in action. So let me get my Kali on. All right, so in between time, I mistakenly left. So I've lost my, so today's recording will be in 2 parts because I left the meeting before I came back. So everything else is gone. So you would have 2 recordings on YouTube for this week. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, and my camera is working now. So nice to see you guys. Nice to see you all today. All right, so back to file inclusion. Is there any group that was not able to figure that out? Is there any breakout room that struggled with even getting the URL and all of that? None? You can put it in the chat. Okay, so
Our group got it with a little bit of help from Jasmine.
yep, and I think she actually helped me too. Without her, I would have been lost today with this 172 thing. And Samuel, thanks to you guys. So the whole idea was to just change this, and you will notice that my DVWA is a bit different from yours because yours is a bit new. I'm using a vulnerable machine that has DVWA installed on it. So I'm using another virtual machine that has DVWA. So that is why for mine, I might have to use 4 dashes, 4 // but for the rest of you, you might have to use something else, which is so for me, it works on the 4th try, but then for the rest of you, it would work on the 5th try. So that is the concept, right? We were trying to back up several directories and then go into the etc folder, check if there is the password file, and then just, so I've included a file that was not supposed to be here. And you could see root user is here. I don't see any other special user, maybe another time, but that is how file, local file inclusion works. Now for remote file inclusion, we would have to sort of, I think we need to go back to the slide. All right, so for remote file inclusion, we are using a different approach, which where it's the process of including remote files through the exploitation of a vulnerable inclusion procedure implemented in the request. So at this point, we are here in this, like we are on this website here trying to get information. But however, we also realized that we need a file to be executed here, but it is not located here. So we are going to call that remote file wherever it is. So we are going to tell this site to go here and get a file named shell, whatever that file is, the name is. And then once it does that, this file would be executed on this site. It would not be transferred. No, it would be executed here. So it's just like, indirectly, it's just like someone talking through me, right? I'm not the one talking, but then maybe there is a connection where someone is talking through me. So in this way, I call for that file, and then that file would be executed on this website. So we are going to create our own MSF Venom today too. We're going to create our MSF Venom, host it on our Python server, and then we are going to call it from this DVWA website, and it's going to execute it and give us a shell. So that is the idea when it comes to, so basically it's the process of including remote files by exploiting vulnerable inclusion procedures implemented in the application, and it allows external URLs. It allows external URLs to be injected into the site. So it is not available on the site, but then you're able to inject it into the site. And it's more dangerous than LFI since the malicious files doesn't have to be executed locally. The file doesn't have to be on the server to be executed. So that makes it more interesting because maybe some servers or websites will not have an option to upload a file, but then due to these weak inclusion procedures or implementation they have in the application, you are able to inject a file that is not located there, and it would run it, and then you have access to the server. Now it exploits PHP's dynamic file include, which it's a different thing altogether. But then with PHP, you are able to sort of include in your code. You can just include HTML file, no, mostly CSS files or maybe function files or something like that. But then you can exploit that by including a file that you did not create, right? So step one, the hacker identifies a web application with insufficient filtering or validation, and then the hacker modifies the URL using .. This is for directory traversal, right? And then 3, the hacker is able to upload a malicious.php file to the hacker's own server, right? And then the hacker will attempt to locate that script using the same method that we used in step 2. This would be better if I demonstrate, right? So let's go to our Kali and then see this in action. So back to Kali. All right, let me know if you can see it. Okay, so as I said, we want to include a particular file here, but then you remember when we did MSF Venom, we used a particular approach. We created a file. What? All right. So the approach we are using now is to, I'll just try to put the steps we're going to do. So first of all, we are going to create our payload, right? So create PHP payload because we are going to make it execute the file for us. And then 2, we are also going to now run a Python server to serve it, right? Or to make it available over the web. And then 3, we are going to set up a listener, netcat listener. And then 4, we are going to execute the RFI, the remote file. Execute file using RFI. All right, so step 1, we have to create the payload. And to create the payload, we are going to, I think we all know how to do that. But today we are going to use a different kind of payload creation, right? Within the directory for Metasploit, there are different payloads. I'm going to the directory where Metasploit is located so that you could see the payloads, the possible payloads. So user share, Metasploit, Metasploit framework, and then we go to modules, payloads, single stages. Let's go for singles. Just these are stageless ones, and all these are possible payloads, but we want the PHP ones. So I'm going to click on PHP, and then in the PHP file, let's change this view to list. So we have bind PHP, that's a bind shell, bind PHP IP version 6. The RB is Ruby, which is another programming language. So we're going to skip all of that. And then we're going to skip that. We have a metaoperator reverse TCP. We have a reverse Perl, reverse PHP, and a shell shock. Now, if you want to use a multi-handler, right, you could use either of them. But in this case, since we want the PHP ones, we would only, these are the possible ones we could run. This guy here, and then these are the only ones that we could run on PHP. The others could be running on Perl, which is a bit different in so these are the only ones we could run. However, we can't all these multi-handlers can handle them, but today we want to use a netcat listener, and netcat listeners cannot receive a metaoperator payload because it's not compatible with it. That's the shortest answer I could give. So we are going to settle for a reverse shell. Since we need reverse shell, we're going to settle for that. Bind shells will use a different approach, so we just need a reverse shell. So all that we need to do when creating our payload is to do this. You know, when we were doing the other one, we did something like this: Windows/metaoperator _ reverse shell. And this is a stageless payload, right? But today we are going to do this PHP / meaning we are going to the PHP folder or the PHP payloads, and we are going to call on this guy here, reverse PHP. That's it. So this is the payload we'll use today, PHP / reverse PHP. That's it. If we were using multi-handler, we could use metaoperator to have more access, but just that. So I'm going to close this. And then we are going to create our payload, right? So MSF Venom payload would be PHP reverse PHP. And then we need to set up our L port and L hosts, right? Our local host, which is 10.0.5.4. And then our L port would be, let's do 9999. And then we are going to specify the format, right? Since it's PHP, let's skip the format and then just let's do the name of the file. So this would be a PHP shell.php. But then we need to specify a format. But then the thing is that MSF Venom does not have a PHP format, right? So all we could say is just do it raw. So format raw means that whatever is in the payload, right, which is PHP reverse PHP, would be executed directly. Like it would use that same format and then pour it out into the file. So I'm going to click on enter, and then you guys should note the port 9999 for me because I may forget. So Steve, whilst it's running, you could ask your question.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, I noticed like a lot of times when we develop payloads, whether it's MSF Venom or, you know, if we're using the MSF console, Metasploit console, why is it like the L ports, they're just random? Is there a reason for that? So I noticed like a lot of them was like, you know, quadruple 9, quadruple 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know what I mean? Is there a reasoning behind that? I mean,
So-
is it just to hide our tracks or?
No, and that's an interesting question. It's a good question. The idea is so every device, right? Most devices have several ports, 65,535 of them. And
Yeah, 100%.
out of these, the first 1,000 are the most common well-known ports, the other on and on and on, right? So the idea is to not use a port that might already be in use, right? Because if you use something like this for 21, it might already be in use by the FTP server. If you
Yeah,
use
100%.
So that's the idea. So to avoid that clash in using a port that's already being used by an existing application, we tend to use something very weird. It could even be, as long as it doesn't exceed 65,000. So it could even be like that, 64,000, and it's going to work. Is that
No,
okay?
that's perfect. Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Yes, and also what Matthew said in the chat, absolutely. So you could go as wide as you want, as wild as you want. So our payload is done. It's created in a PHP shell.php, right? Now, so payload is done. Next step is to run a Python server to serve this PHP file. So for that, we've done that before, Python 3-m. We are going to run the module, that's -m, an HTTP server, so that this will be available over the internet, over the network. So once I run this, that means we are good. Now I'm going to do what I always do, which is to open my split seminar, right? All right. Then I'm also going to set up a listener, right? So netcat performs the same activities at this point, just like a handler. Netcat is able to listen for connections, or also initiate such connections. So in order to, since we are going to execute the file on a particular server, we need to have someone waiting for that connection. Since it's a reverse shell, it's going to come back to us. So that is the idea here. So with netcat, we need to specify that we already have this port open and waiting, right? So this is how netcat works. So P, specify the port, we could do 999, meaning that port 999 is open and waiting for a connection. We don't know who is going to connect, but then we are waiting for that. However, to make netcat, to make it easy, we mostly do NLVP, right? Which, let's put a V at the end. This basically means N, L, V, and then P. That's the meaning. So N means do not do a DNS resolution. L means you are here to listen, right? Meaning we are listening for a connection. V is verbose, and then P is the port. So netcat gives us the opportunity to just join it all up as one. So NLVP. And if I do this, listening on 9999. Now, this is very easy to set up as compared to a multi-handler where you need to open Metasploit, set up a few other things. So now that netcat is waiting for the connection, all I'm going to do is I'm going to shift this to the left side, and then let's go back to our RFI. Our next step is we've set up the listener, so we also need to execute the file using RFI. So instead of this, we are trying to access a file which we don't own. So let's test that let's test that out to see if we can access that, because my Kali's IP address is 10.0.5.4. Uh-oh. Oh, I had to use the ports. So yeah, a good lesson. I have to also add the port number, which is very important. So 8,000. Let's take that HTTPS from there. All right, so the problem was the HTTP and then also the port number. So now, as you can see, that means if I put this URL anywhere on the network, right, it will be accessible. Anyone can access it, not on the internet, on my network. So 10.0.5.4 is my Kali's IP address. I have this URL you are seeing is available because I've set up this Python server, and 200 means it worked, 400 means I was just messing around, so ignore that. And the reason why it's not readable is because I used HTTPS, so secure means that it can't read whatever was there. But now that we've come back to the land of the living, it's now worked, right? So the idea is to, how do I put the same URL into DWA so that we can access the files there? Because all I'm trying to access is the PHP underscore shell file I just created, I think. Yes, PHP underscore shell file, not PHP shell. Let's verify that. PHP underscore shell. So back here, PHP underscore shell, right? So going back to this guy here, and then I'm going to replace the include, because this page, the vulnerability of this page is that it allows both LFI and RFI executions. So I'm going to just, which is remote file inclusion. So I'm going to put that URL here, paste, right? And if I execute it, this is what we have. Now take a look at what's happening here. The website is still at the bottom, but then just like you did with the etc password file, right? So then I still have my file showing up here. So I can look for my file and then click on it direct, but I might be lucky or not lucky. It's always good to specify the file name directly so that it is executed. But let's try to just click on that file to see if that would work. If it doesn't, we would use, we are looking for this here. Increase the brightness. All right. We are looking for PHP shell. Yes, PHP shell. So if I click on that, maybe it will make me download it or something. So once I do that, the site is trying to access it through, see what happened, DVWA, FI, PHP shell. So everything we had, that whole page is equal to has been deleted. So that means if I click on it, it's not going to work. So the idea or the plan is to specify whatever file I'm trying to access directly, PHP underscore shell.php, right? Now, before I execute it, I'm going to pull up my my guy on the left, still waiting for that special connection. I mean, it's been a while, but so now I'm going to click on enter. Did you notice a change? It says now the page will keep loading like this until I decide to close it. But even if I close this page, I already have my access. So connect to blah, blah, blah from unknown has been done. So connect to my IP address. Connect to my Kali's IP address, since it's a reverse shell, from 10.0.5.5, which is where the file is located. Now I'm going to do an ls, right, to check if this works. And these are the files I have. If I do who am I have www data. If I do, so at this point, I've been able to inject a file on this site and I've received that back. So technically I've exploited the site without having my file there. right? How cool is that? So I could go back, cd dot dot, right? ls, cd dot dot again. I'm trying to get to the cd dot dot ls. I'm trying to get to the password file, but looks like it's far away. But anyway, that's the idea, meaning that we've exploited the system using a reverse shell we created with MSF Venom, and we received it with Netcat. Now let's stop that. So I've stopped the attack, clear the screen to make it fresh. To listen again. Now that is how we do an RFI. That's how we do a remote file inclusion, right? Now, the next thing we could also do is that we could also upload a file on the server, and then we could do a local file inclusion based on our MSF Venom. So I'm going to go to, there's an option for upload here. I click on that. It allows me to upload a file. So I'm going to browse and then choose the same file that I just executed. At this point, the first one is done. I've stopped the attack and everything. So I'm looking for php_shell, right click on it. It shows up here, and then I'm going to upload it, right? I'm using a way where the system could keep my file and then I would access it, right? So upload. So it's saying that this file is currently located at //php shell. So let's copy this. Now, this is where some people would make a mistake, thinking that you could do it on any other page. So probably I could just put this here, remove the hash. And if I paste and go, it's not going to work. This is telling us where that file has been uploaded to. But in order to access it, we need to do // to get access to it. Now, the only page that gives you that capability of editing or doing a local file inclusion is the file inclusion page. So I've copied this, and I'm going to go to the file inclusion tab, and then remove include.php once again. Right now, I know where the file is located, right? It's not a local file. So once I do // and I click on enter, do you notice that our guy has changed again? Another one. So that means the connection has been done. This time, it was not an RFI, it was a local file that has been executed because we uploaded our file on the server. So who am I again? You are WWData, ls, yes, so we are on the server. So using these two approaches, we've been able to use upload and perform an LFI. So we created a PHP payload, ran the Python server, set up a Netcat listener, which is NC_NVLP. Now, as I said, if you try to use Netcat with a Metaprater payload like this, where it has Metaprater in the name, it's not going to work. So always note that. We set up our Netcat listener, executed the file using an RFI, and then we also decided to use that same file to perform a local file inclusion, right? So today we've been able to do all of this, which is very interesting. And your assignment for this week, which you'll be using Juice Shop, you are supposed to do some of these attacks on Juice Shop. I told you about the now byte, which I talked about earlier. You might need that in one of your assignments this week. So back to our browser. All right, so that's it in terms of our demonstrations and the slide for today. But we have these labs for today, which is LFI, RFI, which is, for this week. Some of you have still not, some of you are a bit, are delaying on some of the assignments. And all I'm going to say is it's going to take the